I think he's trolling people, honestly. That's something that the executive branch deals with. It's not really in our purview.
And that was Speaker Paul Ryan in July. It turns out the president wasn't just trolling people. Yesterday, the White House announced the president's decision to revoke John Brennan's security clearance. But the former CIA director is not going away quietly. The fierce Trump critic wrote in the New York Times that the president's decision was an effort to silence anyone who challenges him. He also said the president's claims of no collusion are, quote, hogwash. On Wednesday, the president told the Wall Street Journal he tied his decision to the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election and that Brennan was one of the people he held responsible for that probe. The clearance of several other former officials are also under review. Joining me now from Washington is Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief of The Hill. Bob, thanks for being with us. You know, we saw there that Brennan called the move politically motivated, but President Trump himself tied his decision to the Russia probe. So doesn't that back Brennan's claim?
It does somewhat. I mean, I think that the White House was making an attempt here because they had floated the possibility of revoking these credentials for both Brennan and others, which we could see in the coming weeks and days. But to get off the Omarosas story, and certainly it did change the headlines at least for a number of hours. So, you know, substantively, this does not mean that much because certainly the White House was not going to be seeking Brennan's counsel on security matters. But it is something that has entrenched both the left and the right, and certainly Trump allies are saying absolutely take away all these credentials of former Obama officials. So, but substantively, it really doesn't mean that much because it's not like they were giving advice to the president.
Right, and as you just said, you know, they're reviewing the security clearance of other former officials, many of whom have been critical of the president, just like Brennan. So why was it just Brennan at this time?
That's a good question. I think Brennan gets under the skin of the president more so than others, and certainly he has gone after others on that list, including James Comey. But Brennan is a constant presence on cable news, and honestly, this got him back on cable news, talking about the president, criticizing the president, and certainly saying, I'm not gonna cede any ground. I'm not gonna relent. And I think that's what you're gonna see from all these possible people who get their credentials revoked that served in the Obama administration. So this is just another sign of the intelligence world and former intelligence world becoming politicized, really on both sides, and that's not going to stop anytime soon.
And speaking of the intelligence world, the president did not apparently consult his top intelligence official on this, but the Office of the Director of National Intelligence says this was within the president's power. Now, is that enough to quell critics who say there should have been some input from Dan Coats on this move?
I don't think it's enough to quell it. I mean, we've talked to senators on both sides of the aisle. Of course, Democrats are very critical of it, but also some Republicans. So it's drawn some bipartisan opposition. But when I think the president realizes early in his administration, he was getting briefed on pardon power and realized it's really a massive power. And when he found out he had this power, that's when the White House floated to the press that this could happen. And certainly yesterday it did happen. And I do think there is going to be other shoes to drop here. It's just a matter of whether they do them one at a time. And maybe they do them when it's a bad news cycle, just like it's been this week for them.
And it could continue. We have some more tapes apparently that are coming out, but let's stick with this topic for just a second. When someone with the pedigree of John Brennan says, of course, there was collusion, how does that impact the Russia investigation as we know it? I mean, should he be saying that?
You know, I don't think he's going to change any minds, certainly. And I think some of the level-headed people on Capitol Hill and in politics generally, there are not many of them left, are saying, listen, let's have Robert Mueller finish his investigation. I don't anticipate that's going to be anytime soon. He really can't do it, I think, now. It's too close to the election. I don't think he can wrap up right after the election because then Democrats will be critical of why he didn't release it beforehand. So I think this is going to go into 2019. But the fact that Brennan says that, Brennan does know some things, but also he has been a critic of the president. So I don't think it can be taken too seriously, but it is a sign that he knows something that he's not telling us, or perhaps, and it could be collusion. But at the same time, we've seen Robert Mueller have a number of indictments and plea deals, but we haven't yet seen collusion. Paul Manafort's on trial for financial crimes a decade before he joined the Trump campaign. So, but but he's not done yet. He's clearly,
Right.
there's a lot more that we don't know that Robert Mueller's going to drop.
Now, critics say revoking Brennan's clearance yesterday was a distraction tactic, as you suggested, by the White House dealing with fallout over Omarosas' book. The original statement released was dated July 26th. They are now blaming that on a copy and paste error. But the idea was first raised just 3 days before that. So does that raise questions to you?
Yeah, I think that's an indication that this was going to happen. It's just a matter of when, and when they decided to release it, that they had this bit of news. They knew it would be big news. It was. The White House announced it during the press briefing, and it became big news. And it is big news, but I do think that shows you that dating issue is probably an indication that they had this in the can and they just wanted to release it when it was politically viable.
Now, meanwhile, Omarosa, who also wants to, I guess, return the conversation to her book, released another recording today. This one is of President Trump's daughter-in-law, Lara Trump, and allegedly took place just days after Omarosa was fired from the White House. Let's play some of it.
But listen, obviously with like the New York Times article and stuff, it's.
What's the New York Times article?
The one that it was in the New York Times today. I guess you did with Maggie Haberman, or they wrote about you. It sounds a little like obviously that there's something you got in the back pocket to pull out. Clearly, if you come over as a campaign, like we can't have, we gotta.
Oh God, no.
Everybody's positive, right? So the only thing that we have to consider when we're talking salary as far as the campaign is concerned is that, as you know, everything is public. And all the money that we raise and that pays salaries is directly from donors, small dollar donors for the most part. So I know you were making $179 at the White House. And I think we could work something out where we keep you right along those lines. Specifically, let me see, I haven't even added up the numbers, but we were talking about like $15K a month. Let me see what that adds up to. 12. Yeah, so that's $180,000. Does that sound like a fair deal for you? In terms of your position specifically, I really feel like your position would require, you to be able to be flexible in terms of where you are. Sometimes, come to New York for occasional meetings, but I would love if you could, occasionally go do speaking engagements and that sort of thing for us. I think you'd be awesome doing that. And so it doesn't really matter where you are. If you're comfortable staying in D.C., then, we're more than happy to have you.
So we heard her recordings of the president, of John Kelly, of campaign aides, and now this, where it appears the discussion was around keeping Omarosa, keeping her on somehow to speak for the president on the campaign after she left the White House. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, certainly she's media savvy, and the question is how many tapes does she have? She obviously held this for the release of her book, and I do think it's a question of, months ago before the Michael Cohen and Omarosa tape surfaced, the question was which Trump administration official was wearing a wire for Robert Mueller? Well, Omarosa was wearing a wire for Omarosa, and this is certainly helping her PR campaign and her book sales. She's doing quite well, and the president's honestly helping her in that, in talking about Omarosa and criticizing her by calling her that dog. So. Listen, I think that this is an ongoing problem for the White House because they don't know what's coming next. And, of course, my take on this is that everything in Washington is done with a wink and a nod, and you can make a credible argument, okay, we fired you, Omarosa, but we have a soft landing for you. Make the same amount of money as long as you continue to play ball and not criticize the president.
Right. All right. We'll see what else comes dribbling out in terms of the tapes. Bob Cusack, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.